one night of just an inspired epiphany. This is a true story. It sounds very corny, but in the middle of the night, this idea hit me. I got up, I wrote out a deck in the middle of the night, and I would say 80% of what Life Science Cares is today was in that deck.
We're all ready for you guys to cure cancer. It seems like you maybe have cured obesity. You know, we're ready for more of it. So give us a little window into what is coming.
It also solves for depression and other behavioral health and mental health conditions now. So it's more than that.
What are you guys going to cure next? Tell us.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about curing poverty because that's where I've spent a lot of my time, is thinking about how our industry and the kind of unique aspects of our industry can be impactful for those people who are in our communities, particularly the communities where the biopharma hubs kind of exist, and trying to figure out how we can work in those communities to make a big difference for people who are frankly living a different life than those of us in the knowledge economy.
This is Second Opinion. I'm Christina Farr.
I'm Ash Sanuz. And I'm Luba Greenwood.
Welcome to the pod, where each week we navigate what's really going on in healthcare through strikingly candid conversations with the entrepreneurs and investors leading the charge. As your co-hosts, we promise to bring the perspective of a former journalist and investor, a doctor, a lawyer, immersed in the future of medicine with life sciences and digital health.
And we're here to set the signal from the noise in all of these conversations. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Rob, thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have you here on our podcast. I have been telling both Ash and Chrissy about just you in general and how impressive you are. Everything from starting out and running a very successful biotech, exiting. There are not that many people that are starting a business in our business and actually exit it, to a big pharma, and then actually starting out Life Science Cares and giving back to the community. And while you're doing that, also making phenomenal investments and helping companies grow as well. So we're so thrilled to have you. And I'd love to kick off the discussion and just ask you, I was talking about you behind your back with some of your friends and board members at Life Science Cares, and they told me the story about you, which I did not know, that as soon as you exited your company, and most of the people that I know, and I'm sure you know, when they do that, they buy a yacht, or they go on a year-long sailing vacation, or they go and they talk about how, smart they are and different they are because.
Do they do that on the yacht, Luba, or like
Both on the yacht, that's right, or on the plane,
Okay.
and attribute all the success to themselves. And you did literally the opposite. First of all, attributing your success to a phenomenal team, but most importantly, you literally almost the same day went around and you said, gosh, we are so lucky here in the Boston ecosystem, but look, there are people even in Cambridge, in our own town, that are struggling. I mean, they can't put food, and on their table. They don't have money. They can't eat. And you thought about the community and the immediate community. So and then you started this phenomenal organization. So can you take us through that process? First of all, thank you so much for doing that. Again, you really are, I would want to say one of the few people that do it, but you're actually the only person that I know that does it. So can you tell us about that journey and how did these even happen? And are those rumors true?
Well, first of all, what an amazing opening. Thank you, Luba. I'm going to try to carry that around with me every place I go. That was really, really nice and sweet. And it really is a pleasure to meet you, Ash and Chrissy, and to be here with Luba, who's been a friend colleague for many years. So thank you all. It really is a pleasure to be here. The number one, I think the industry deserves a ton of credit here for what Life Science Cares is. So the initiation of it started, yes, after, at Cubist, we had, I think, proudly, I will say, I think we had a differentiated culture. And if you talk to people around the biotech community who now are fortunate enough to have people from Cubist as part of their companies, I think they would tell you the same thing. People really raved about our culture, and part of our culture was our commitment to service. It was a little bit different than other companies, and which I think, by the way, is important to culture. And so we attracted people who believed in the world being bigger than themselves, even the very, very significant mission that we had, which was to ensure that people who had serious infections had the antibacterials that they needed. So after Cubist, that commitment to service was kind of already there in terms of who I am and who our leaders were. And I just kind of continued it and had the benefit of, one night of just an inspired epiphany. This is a true story. It sounds very corny, but in the middle of the night, this idea hit me. And, it's one of the reasons why I'm not showing false humility. I don't really, in many ways, deserve much credit for this at all. It was given to me in the middle of the night. I got up, I wrote out a deck in the middle of the night, and I would say 80% of what Life Science Cares is today was in that deck that I wrote out that evening. I worked on it for weeks and months just to kind of fine tune, and then went out to industry leaders, some of whom I knew pretty well and others I didn't. I mean, I wasn't like the biggest deal in the industry by any means. And it was a little frightening to send that deck out to people and say, hey, would you join me in this cause? And I was absolutely pleasantly surprised that industry leaders, the very people at the very top of the industry, just came back right away saying, I'm in. What can we do? This sounds great. And so from that point on, the industry has been amazing with accepting this idea and realizing that our unique talents and resources could make a difference for people who are impacted by poverty. And so that's what we do at Life Science Cares. We basically provide a channel for our industry, and we define the industry broadly. We provide a channel for people to care, both financially as well as through human capital. And we try to work with the best nonprofits doing work in poverty to be able to impact the people they serve.
Rob, I'm going to ask you more of an industry macro question as somebody who, doesn't live and breathe biotech in the same way that you and Luba do. And that's really to reflect on this piece that I saw this week, actually, in the journal, I believe, that was about how biotech funding is now starting to come back. It hit kind of a peak during the pandemic, as with all kind of healthcare investing, and then came down back to earth, crashing, and now seems to be tracking back up. So can you give us a bit of context about why that might be? Like, why are investors starting to kind of come back to biotech after a dark couple of years where, from everything I was hearing and we all were hearing, things just were really tough, especially for these very early stage companies that, didn't have any data, that, were just kind of trying to raise money with an idea.
Sure. I can give you my perspective. I'm sure Luba has a more informed perspective, as do others. But from my perspective, what we're seeing is much more of a flight to quality. So I think what is happening is, during the kind of bubble period that we experienced a few years ago, there were a number of companies getting funding that were super early or had just an idea, not a lot of data, that were getting funded. And that, I think, as things turned the other way, people started to they got burned, or frankly, they realized that their investment really wasn't as far along as maybe they thought, or that they should have been. So what we see now is there is more investment coming back, but where it's coming back is more of the story, in my opinion. It's coming back to those companies with data, those companies with real strong science. And there is more of a have and have nots within the market, where those companies who either went through the bubble and didn't preserve cash, or had an idea during that time but really don't have the data, they're still having a very hard time attracting capital. But the companies who do have good science, and more importantly, they have the data to back it up, are finding a more robust market. So I think that's more of how I see the market kind of bearing out. It's the haves and have-nots right now.
Yeah, I think that thesis is dead on. And I actually want to pick on Luba a little bit too on that and see if Rob has maybe further perspectives, and would love to ask about what you're seeing on the fund front as well. Because I wonder, at least on the health tech side where I focus, the lack of exits has made it really difficult for these funds to raise their next funds. And so what you see is a lot of zombie funds that are sort of, not actually deploying anything right now. And that becomes really hard for these companies to know who even they should speak to, because not everybody actually has capital. Like it's I think it, again, have and have not. Like if you're a have not, you might be wasting your time with a lot of dead funds. So do you see that same thing in biotech, or have you all kind of seen enough in terms of exit activity to really drive kind of some of these funds to be able to continue investing off the back of this thesis?
Luba, you want to take that first, or?
Is this for me?
Both of you, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Chrissy, I love that you're asking me. And the reason I love it is because I'm seeing digital health is where biotech was about a year and a half ago. And so everybody's freaking out and thinking this is the end of the world and we will never come out of this. And so I see why you're asking this. And can digital health learn anything from biotech? And
I think we're in the pit of despair, Luba, on the digital health side. So maybe take us out of it.
I know, and I can tell you, and I want to go back to exactly what Rob said at the beginning, is that we had basically a nice cleanup. There were, and the same thing, I think even more so on the digital health side. You have a lot of companies, and the reason I say even more so is that in biotech, some of the mistakes that we do is first of all, we go way too early and we promise too much with what a lot of the times we call platform technology, is that novel biology, something really truly exciting that may or may not work in an animal. And we're projecting that it's going to solve all and every problem. And of course, that is the mechanism, forgetting that we're human beings, that, sometimes there are other mechanisms that work against this mechanism in reality that may not actually work. And so by going too early and having valuations that are too high, or also not having the right team. I mean, one of the things I want to talk about today also is having that right team with the right mindset, that at the end of the day, why are we here? We're here to cure disease. We're here to find something real for patients. We're not here to spend billions of dollars on super cool projects. We're not spending billions of dollars on something that, five other companies are spending billions of dollars on. And we're not interested in a me too. We're looking for something that's really, truly transformational with the right team that can get us there. And that is exactly what happened in biotech, is we had a clean up of the companies that were just not well positioned, didn't have the right science, didn't have the right team, were way too early for the valuations that they were asking. And that's exactly what you have right now in digital health, but even more so, because at least in biotech, even if you are early and you're making mistakes, at least at the end of the day, there is an actual strategy. There's an actual market. There are patients.
That's a good point, because I don't think we have that.
You don't have that. There
in digital health. We don't have a market. That's our problem. It's like,
exactly.
you could do everything right. You can tick all the boxes. For you guys in biotech, if you do the impossible and you get to a place where it's ready to be commercialized, you have a playbook. We do not have a playbook. And that's the problem that, maybe holds us back.
Well, that's the problem, is you don't have a problem. You're a solution searching for a problem. In biotech, we know what the problem is. We know what the disease is. We know exactly now with genomics, a lot of the times we know exactly the patient population we're going after. Even during the good times, we almost always for personalized medicine. And, we're going for the right population. We know what we're doing. In digital health, you're sort of creating some thesis that if you're going to go for a run, and somebody will remind you that you need to go for a run when you have 3 jobs and 3 comorbidities and you can't put food on the table, that if somebody keeps on texting you that you have to go for a run, you're going to reverse their diabetes. Come on, I mean, seriously, let's get serious here.
This is going to turn into the digital health versus biotech wars. So what are all you biotech folks like really thinking is exciting right now? Like from the outside, I think some of us, we might have ideas. We're all ready for you guys to cure cancer. It seems like you maybe have cured obesity. We're ready for more of it. So give us a little window into what is coming.
It also solves for depression and other behavioral health and mental health conditions now. So it's more than that.
What are you guys going to cure next? Tell us.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about curing poverty because that's where I'm spending a lot of my time. is thinking about how our industry and the kind of unique aspects of our industry can be impactful for those people who are in our communities, particularly the communities where the biopharma hubs kind of exist, and trying to figure out how we can work in those communities to make a big difference for people who are frankly living a different life than those of us in the knowledge economy. So while I definitely am a proud card carrying member of the biotech community for 30 something years, there are lots of folks who can talk about what's coming up in biotech. I think for me, my focus is really certainly in my day job with GA, helping them to think about investments and working with our portfolio companies. But my passion and my side gig is trying to figure out how to impact poverty in those who really need a helping hand.
So tell me more, Rob, about that. I mean, what I'm seeing and what's really exciting from being in Boston is just how many biotech companies are involved with life science cares, and also the leadership is involved with life science cares. Can you tell us more about the programs that you do?
Sure. So Life Science Cares is in now 5 biopharma hubs. So Boston, Philadelphia, San Diego, San Francisco, and New York, and has just started in Switzerland, actually.
I heard. I was going to ask you. That was my question. Like, is there poverty in Switzerland?
Well, it's funny. I asked the same question when it was proposed, and certainly it's different there. Much more of an access kind of issue for the floor is higher for people there, right? There's a safety net that doesn't exist here in the U.S., but still there's a need, and there's some really committed people involved there doing some great work. But what we found in all those hubs, Luba, is the leaders of the biotech communities in those spaces are involved with Life Science Cares. Many of them are on our board. They're the folks who are out kind of raising the money and bringing various companies in. And the smaller companies they love the model because it provides them with kind of an outsourced corporate social responsibility effort. So they can they don't have to have their own CSR effort. They can tap into what we do at Life Science Cares, and their company, either as a team or as individuals, can join some of the volunteer efforts that we have, some of the fundraising, or some of the donation efforts that we have in order to really make a difference. So again, what's been amazing to me, surprisingly positive, is by giving people just the vehicle, maybe reminding them to think about it. Folks are absolutely opting in with their time, with their treasure, to be able to help. And that's what we try to do every day.
And do you have programs, internship programs as well as part of Life Science Cares?
Yes. So we have, most of what we do is through other nonprofits, because we didn't want to have to build something that already existed. But we do have our own program in the internship space because we didn't see a program that fit the needs of our industry. So we have a program called Project On-Ramp that is a program for college students who are financially impacted by poverty. So they're all Pell Grant eligible students. And these students are provided in many instances, their first paid internship in a life sciences company. And that includes lab roles all the way through legal and business and regulatory, all across the business. And these young people, extremely talented young people, get a chance to really have a spot in our industry. The other really interesting part of this program is it's been, I think, significantly impactful for the industry itself, because many of these kids come from schools that we don't often recruit from. I'm actually one of those kids. I went to a school called Cal State LA in Los Angeles, which is a state school that kind of educated kids from the inner city. And there are schools like Cal State LA and UMass Boston and Framingham State and Sacramento State in the Bay Area that are providing kids to this program. And our companies are saying, wow, these kids are amazingly talented, and we would have never found them if not for On-Ramp. So this past summer, we did over 300 internships for college students, and we're on a path to get to 1,000 interns a summer by 2027, 2028. So it really is one of our signature programs. And to me, it's one of the things that we do that can really have a lasting impact, because many of these kids do get jobs with our companies. And even if they don't, they get a chance to explore an industry that most of them didn't know. They don't have the contacts that a lot of our kids or our kids' friends have. So what I'm always asking my life science colleagues and executives to do is, when you take an intern that is a friend or a colleague's son or somebody who's connected, for each time that you do that, for someone who has that privilege, frankly, take one of our kids and give them the same chance, and from there let the chips fall where they may. But I think you'll find that these young people are extraordinarily talented and they have the grit to really make them successful.
So how do you build bridges between kind of populations that I think have felt very left out by the healthcare system and, sometimes taken advantage of by the healthcare system? And we've all kind of, read these studies, and I think these are absolutely kind of warranted. There is massive bias in our system. And how do you take that and then kind of reconcile it with kind of this message around life sciences caring? And then when you look at the macro, there are a lot of people out there that don't trust in our medical system and have taken to alternate information sources, sometimes TikTok and elsewhere, to collect information that is not accurate and are making decisions that are not science-based. So how does your work in the biotech industry kind of meets, some of your philanthropic work? How do you kind of reconcile the two around this idea that, these communities who are stricken by poverty and experiencing poverty more often are also the very same communities that have felt very pushed away by the system that we have?
It's an excellent question, Christy, and it's one that, frankly, we need to do better as an industry. One of the things that we're doing at Life Science Cares is we have a kind of new focus on health equity. We've raised some money around this and had some specific donations to target this issue. And health equity is a big, big topic, and it could mean a lot of things. We're in the process of kind of focusing that down to the areas that we think we can have the most impact as an industry. I do think, Luba and I are both part of Dana-Farber, and I know that Dana-Farber is an example of an organization that has thought really deeply about this in the cancer community in terms of what outreach looks like, what screening could look like. There's, some of the lung cancer screening differences in underserved populations relative to more wealthy populations are just abysmal. So part of it is reaching out and setting up the programs, the specific tasks to get out into those communities. One of the things we did at Life Science Cares during the pandemic is we raised a fund specifically for COVID-19. And we went out into the community with some of our partners. One example was the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And frankly, went out and, and vaccinated people who were on the streets. And it took that kind of effort to really be out there and in that community and with extra money, extra resource. And we ended up with an outcome that looked like in the Tenderloin, we had a vaccination rate that mirrored some of the more wealthy suburbs of San Francisco. So we were able to have tremendous success because of our ability to raise the funding needed, but most importantly, get out and do the sweat equity that needed to be done to help people. So I think one of the things that, your second part of your question was, how do we impact the trust within the industry? And when that's a whole nother podcast, probably hours. But I do think that when the community sees the life sciences community doing things that don't have an alternative objective of making us rich, it does tend to add to our brand and our trust. So part of what, I have a friend that wrote a great book called Good is the New Cool. And it really is about that one of the best things you can do in branding is to go out and make a difference in the world. And people will actually give you more for that than you out saying how great you are and how much, you care about everything. So what I think we're doing is we're out in the world and we're hoping that people, the main reason is we want to help people, but a good secondary benefit is folks are going to say, hey, there's those life sciences people again, out actually making a difference in our community. And it's not just, keeping their prices up or doing the other things that they feel may just benefit our pocketbooks.
So I think that's really interesting, Rob. So I used to work at Salesforce, where Mark Benioff would always say doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive, and businesses can be a platform for change. And I feel like that really applies here. One of the things that was sort of very important across the company was the company culture through its 1-1-1 model. They brought in structured volunteerism and philanthropy. Do you see that this is being adopted, or does it already exist in the life sciences sector, or is this a relatively new concept in the last decade that's taking hold because of this sort of hero villain view of the biotech industry?
Yeah, it has existed for many years. One of the things that I found when I was starting Life Science Cares is candidly, I was thinking about doing something bigger than the life sciences community in Boston. And I went out and I talked to a lot of leaders, philanthropic leaders in Boston. And the idea that I was pitching, they said, this will never work. But then they gave me feedback like, hey, what are you guys doing in the life sciences community? I never see you involved in the issues of our community. And I thought, well, that's unfair because some of our largest companies, the Biogens, the Vertexes, Alnylam's, had significant outreach, philanthropy, and volunteer activity. But in our industry, you have very, very few of those big organizations. Much of the industry are small companies, and if they're involved in anything philanthropically, it's usually in the therapeutic area that they're working in. They're working with the patients who they're trying to serve. So what Life Science Cares does is it provides us more of an aggregate ability to make a collective impact. So it takes all those small companies, and fortunately, the larger companies have jumped in with us as well. They don't need us as much because they have their own efforts, but they've jumped in with us as well so that collectively we can make a broader impact. So it's not just because I think people, feel like, hey, this is a good way to enhance our industry's reputation. I think the people who go into this industry care about humanity. That's why they go into the industry. And to be able to tap into that makes the companies better. It helps their culture. It helps their employee engagement. We all know, particularly young people, want to be involved with companies that are involved in the issues of today. And a lot of these companies are too small to have their own effort. So what they do is they kind of partner with us, and we help to collectively move the industry into areas where they're going to make a significant difference.
So on that note, you've been really vocal and you've talked about the culture within companies from an employee perspective. You've talked about the energy tax that certain, underrepresented groups face in the workplace. How does this concept come into your broader work of Life Science Cares, or is it a totally different, engagement for you? And are companies prioritizing this in your, the biotech industry?
Yeah, well, the energy tax that I wrote about had a lot to do with kind of diversity, difference, and authenticity at work, right? So I think, look, the what I'm trying to accomplish is authentically me. That's who I am. That's my upbringing. I feel like I have been blessed to have found this industry, to have had the leaders and the mentors who've helped me along, and to have had the good fortune to do well in this industry. So being able to give back is just a natural kind of next step for me. I think what I wrote about is I talked to so many individuals who, for whatever reason, feel or perceive themselves as different in the work environment. And I talk a lot about this, that it takes usually about like 5 minutes for many of them in that discussion to start crying or to get really emotional. And it struck me that and I kind of have felt this too, there's a lot of energy that it takes to be the only woman in the boardroom or the only person of color in a meeting, where the people who don't feel that difference are able to just answer a question, or put their point of view out there. Whereas if you're the only person of color in that room, you have to think about, okay, how's this going to land? How's this person going to feel? How am I going to be perceived? There's all this energy that has to happen before you put that out. And it happens instantaneously and it happens naturally. But for those of us, and I'm sure you guys probably can speak to this, when you're one of the only ones in a space, it can be taxing. And that's basically what I had said. And so I do think that if this is your authentic outlet, then Life Science Cares and giving back is a terrific way to do it. But for other people, they have different outlets, and that's fantastic. My message on that was more around authenticity and bringing who you are to the table. Recognize that there could be attacks, but at the same time, if your authentic difference isn't respected to the degree you expect, be confident enough to take your skills and talents down the road to the next place, and then beat that place, like a drum. That's the way I feel about it.
I think I heard Disney say when I was visiting there on one of their culture trips, if you don't find your happiness here, you got to find it, like you said, walk it and find it elsewhere. It's totally okay. So
I love this. Have you done, and I'm sure you have, the kind of analysis of what has and has not worked, and also what percentage of the interns that are coming are interested? I'm sure they're really fantastic. I mean, I can hear it from my colleagues that are part of the on-ramp program. They love the interns. And you're absolutely right. Many, if not most, come back and, for full-time jobs. How many of them want to actually come back and feel welcome or feel like they can make a difference? Or there'll be more. We all know there's almost zero, maybe somewhat few percentage of diversity in biotech. How many of them think that, okay, I'll come back and things will change?
That's a great question. And I don't have the specific stat. My bet is that it's somewhere around 70% of the young people that go into these internships do want to go into the life sciences industry. But the 30% who don't still get a tremendous benefit from the program, because they learn something about themselves and they learn something that they don't want to do, which is really important. And I could speak to this. I lucked into this industry, totally random. Saw an ad in the paper when there were ads in the paper. You guys are all too young for this, but back in the day, there used to be ads in the paper for jobs, and it said $37,000 a year and a car. And I was like, boom, that's my job. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know what pharmaceutical sales is, but that's what I want to do because that sounds amazing. And so that's how I got into the industry. And there were then and are now a number of talented young people who would be amazing in the industry. They just don't know anything about it. So for those who learn about it and say, this could be a place for me, awesome. But for those who try it and say, this isn't a place for me, but I know now that there's this other industry and maybe I can pursue others that I might not know about. So it becomes a great experience for everyone. And as I said, I wouldn't underappreciate the fact that the experience for the company and the hiring manager is also changing because they realize that there's talent out there everywhere.
Well, there's talent that probably makes them a better manager and opens them up as well. Another interesting question, we always in biotech talk about East Coast versus West Coast. And of course, East Coast is the best. Just kidding. Any changes since you're in these hubs? I mean, are you seeing any changes, differences between the hubs and their programs and what resonates better?
Absolutely. I mean, the beauty of Life Science Cares is it's local. So each local area, they raise the money, their own money, and they decide where their money is going to be deployed. Now, we have a national effort on like Project On-Ramp and some other national things that gets rolled out across all of them. But for the most part, the local board and the local team decides how the money wants to be deployed. And it is very different. I mean, markets like Philadelphia, which faces some of the biggest poverty in Center City that we have in the entire country, have much more of a need for really fundamental poverty issues. San Diego has a tremendous impact on again on-ramp, as well as working with other nonprofits to help students who a lot of Hispanic students, for example, get access to our industry, who are in earlier ed, middle school, as well as community colleges. So each area kind of decides what the important issues are for its area and through its nonprofits, and makes those decisions locally.
That's amazing. I was going to say one last question for you. What advice would you give to new leaders, emerging leaders in the life sciences space who are trying to navigate both their commercial success, but really trying to participate in this like positive social impact and change? How do they tie those things together earlier in their careers?
Yeah, I think we're taught as leaders often that, obviously shareholder value is what matters. And sometimes the message is forget about everything else. There's no other constituencies that matter. And I have a strong belief, at least at Cubist, we believed we could kind of sum up our culture in three areas: patients first. And then we obviously cared about shareholders, but community was the other one, and community and employees. So we really wanted to make sure that we were leaning into those in a really kind of differential way. So for young leaders, I would say think about your entire, but also, what are the things that are going to drive you, especially for patients. I'm nowhere near as smart as most of the people in the biotech community. So for me, if I could focus on what was right for the patient, and I just run every decision through that kind of lens, chances are it was going to guide me to the right place. And I think for young leaders, if you start with that, you're going to be in a pretty good place. And don't try to be too focused or too pulled by your investors and your shareholders on the value creating things that can sometimes seem really attractive in the short term, but where you lose sight on the long term, which we're all here for, which is helping people.
Yeah, that's a great point to make. If you stay focused on people first and patients first, you can't go wrong across the healthcare and life sciences industry, whether you're in biotech or health tech or anything else. So,
%.
Yeah, I just was it's interesting because you talk about community, and one of the things, and I'm sure Rob, you see this also, there are a lot of different countries and cities that come into the hubs, biotech hubs, and they're trying to recreate the success of the hubs that we have and where you operate. And it's interesting because whatever they try to do, it never works. They pour the money in, they bring in, 5, 10 people that they think are going to be helpful. They forcibly bring people and bring companies and do these exchanges. And then they ask, well, why didn't it work? And there's a lot of it which it didn't work because actually you're missing the whole entire community. So it's not actually just investors. It's not just because you have a bunch of hospitals within walking distance. It's not, just because you happen to have a bunch of smart people around. There is, or policies. It's actually, there is something about the community that makes it work, and the people in that community that make it work. I don't know if you've also noticed that, and that's why I love what you do, because you bring that whole point of the community, and we need to support that community. Otherwise, if we lose the community, we're going to be like these other, people with lots of money that are trying to make something artificial work that doesn't work.
You said it beautifully, Luba. That when we started Life Science Cares, there were a lot of, if there was pushback from some of the folks within the industry, it was, hey, this sounds great, but why don't we just do STEM education, for example? That's an unmet need. We're going to need it for our workforce. Let's just focus there. And the point that I kept making is there are people within, our community, within our, that clean our offices, that take our employees to work, that frankly enable the infrastructure for all of this to happen. And they're living a completely different life. So the more that we can make them also a part of what we do and how we bring innovation to patients, the better off we're going to be. And so you're exactly right. Thinking broader about what is our industry. It's not just the people at the top or even the folks at the bench who are extraordinary. It's a collection of all of us. And if we think about how we can expand the lives of everybody in our industry, then we're going to be better at producing those innovations for patients.
That's amazing. Well, I have one last question for you. If you were to give advice to a CEO or a business leader in the life sciences, and they want to, make a culture and do the culture correctly, what should they do? Is it, definitely, I understand, partner with Life Science Cares, and any words of advice to them for clearly supporting your community makes you also very successful. Any final words of advice for them?
Thank you. Yeah, I do a lot of thinking, speaking, writing about culture. And the first thing that I say to people is, if you really want to have a good culture, number one, you need to make sure that your culture is aligned with your kind of operating model, is aligned with your overall objective. When those things match up, that's when everything sinks. And just an example of that, if, for example, you have a culture of high inclusivity and asking people to weigh in on everything, you want everybody's opinion, but you're operating in a space where you got to be as fast as possible. Those two things aren't going to match, because asking everybody for their opinion doesn't allow you to be fast. So the first point is make sure that your culture aligns with your strategy, aligns with the way that you're going to compete. And then the second thing is to make sure your culture is unique to you. This is the problem I think we have a lot in our industry. There's a lot of, we're in it for patients. Our culture is about trying to help people, which is great, but it's everybody's culture. So how does your culture and your environment feel different to your employees than it does to others? And if your culture is great, it will attract people who are like you and frankly, repel those who aren't, who may actually be really great people and great in other cultures, but not in yours. That's when you know you have a differentiated culture and something that isn't just so milquetoast that it's really nothing. So my advice to people is, I think culture really matters, especially when it's aligned, but many, many companies don't really have a culture, or their culture is no culture. So if you really want it to sing, have it be different and do something that others don't. That's when you know you really got something.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's wonderful to have you on our podcast. You've taught us a lot, and you're such an authentic leader. It's obvious that you have to have an authenticity to actually understand who you are, so that you have the same culture internally. And just grateful for all the work that you do. And I know the life sciences community is grateful for what you do and your organization, Life Science Cares. Thank you so much for being with us. And hopefully you can come back next time as well, tell us and give us an update on Switzerland. I'm very curious how the program works there.
I'd love to. And thank you for having me. Best of luck on the show. It's amazing. And really appreciate the time and the chance to talk about Life Science Cares.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Second Opinion. Share it with colleagues and friends and message us to let us know what topics you want to discuss on the podcast. If you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and make sure you are subscribed. And check out Christina's Second Opinion newsletter on Beehive. A link to subscribe is in the episode description. Second Opinion is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Turpentine DC, Age of Miracles, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.